Oftentimes, when an artist is on the brink of a major shift in their career, they release a piece of work that fully embodies the transformation to come. These works are often experimental, reflective, and intentionally disruptive, different from their prior works, yet offering a glimpse into the artist's evolution. However, these projects are frequently overlooked or overshadowed by the artist's more iconic or commercially successful outputs. Two prominent examples of this phenomenon are Tyler the Creator's Cherry Bomb and The Weeknd's Kissland. Both albums had mixed reviews upon release and were initially perceived as low points in their career. But over time, they've gained recognition as pivotal turning points, laying the groundwork for the sounds and styles these artists would become celebrated for. Another album fits this mold too perfectly, yet somehow it remains criminally underrated and underappreciated in modern discussions about hip-hop. Eminem's Relapse, his 2009 studio album. Now, to be fair, Relapse wasn't exactly a failure. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, selling over 600,000 copies in its first week. It also won 2 Grammys, including one for Best Rap Album. But despite its initial success, Relapse has struggled to maintain a positive legacy. It's often dismissed as a misstep or a curiosity, a strange detour in Eminem's catalog that doesn't hold the same weight as the Marshall Mathers LP or The Eminem Show. But today, I want to challenge that narrative. I believe Relapse is far more than a flawed experiment or a footnote in Eminem's career. It's a deeply ambitious, thematically rich, and conceptually cohesive project that deserves far more praise than it gets. So let's dive in and explore why Relapse deserves its flowers. To fully appreciate Relapse, it's crucial to understand the events in Eminem's life that led to its creation. The late 2000s were a tumultuous period for M, a time marked by personal loss, addiction, and a near complete disappearance from the public eye. In many ways, Relapse was born out of chaos, pain, and the long road to recovery. In the years leading up to the album's release, Eminem was grappling with a crippling addiction to prescription drugs. His struggles began in the early 2000s during the height of his fame when he was prescribed medication with Vicodin and Ambien to cope with stress, insomnia, and physical pain from performing. Over time, what started as a means of escape spiraled into full-blown dependency. By 2005, Eminem's addiction had reached its breaking point. That year, he canceled his European anger management tour, checked into rehab, and announced his indefinite hiatus from music. It was also during this period that tragedy struck. In December 2006, Eminem's best friend and longtime collaborator, Proof, was shot and killed outside a Detroit nightclub. Proof's death devastated Eminem, pushing him further isolation and deeper into his addiction. In interviews, Eminem has described the years following Proof's death as some of the darkest moments in his life. He became a recluse, spending his days in a haze of pills and fast food. His weight ballooned to nearly 230 pounds, and his health deteriorated to the point where he overdosed on methadone in late 2007. Doctors later told him that he had consumed the equivalent of 4 bags of heroin. That overdose was a wake-up call. In early 2008, Eminem began the process of getting sober, a journey far from easy. The withdrawal symptoms were brutal, spoken openly about how difficult it was to reconnect with his creativity after many years of relying on substances. But as he worked through his recovery, he began using music in the way that made him a global sensation in the first place, channeling his experiences into his raps. Enter Relapse. The album became Eminem's way of confronting the darkness he had been living in, using music as a form of therapy. Reconnecting with longtime collaborator Dr. Dre, who produced the majority of the album, the two spent months crafting a sound that reflected Eminem's mental and emotional state. The result was an album that felt cold, clinical, and unsettling, a sonic representation of addiction and the twisted narratives that can arise from a mind in chaos. Eminem himself said that much of Relapse was written while he was rediscovering his sobriety and relearning how to write without the aids of drugs. And this is part of what makes the album so raw and unique. It captures an artist in transition, grappling his demons in real time. The horrorcore aesthetic, the violent imagery, and even the exaggerated accents all stem from this period of rediscovery. It was Eminem testing the limits of his creativity, pushing himself to see what he could do after years away from the mic. The themes of relapse, addiction, recovery, self-destruction, and rebirth are inseparable from the events that shaped its creation. It's an album that couldn't exist without the pain and chaos that preceded it. Understanding the context behind Relapse doesn't just make the album more compelling, it makes it essential. It's not just a collection of songs, it's a snapshot of a man clawing his way back from the brink, using his art to process the unthinkable. At its core, Relapse is a horror movie on wax. Eminem draws heavily from the slasher and psychological thriller genres, crafting an album drenched in blood, paranoia, and grotesque imagery. The album's concept is rooted in Eminem's struggle with addiction and recovery, but it also takes those struggles and filters them through the lens of horror fiction. The result is a nightmarish, often disturbing listening experience. On tracks like 3 AM, Eminem plays the role of a deranged killer, detailing gruesome acts with chilling detachment.
Yeah. There is no escaping. There's no place to hide.
On Stay Wide Awake, He steps even further into a role of a predator, inhabiting a character so vile and depraved it's hard to listen to without feeling uneasy.
I see my target, put my car in park and approach a tender young girl by the name of Brenda, and I pretend to befriend her.
These songs aren't meant to glorify violence or shock for the sake of shock. They're artistic explorations of the darkest corners of the human psyche. But the album's cinematic atmosphere is only expanded with its various skits, a staple of Eminem's music.
Thank God you stopped. I've been standing out here for like an hour. Soaking wet, freezing. Thank you so much. Really, you're a lifesaver. What are you doing? The fucking... Get away from me! The fucking asshole! Get away from me!
Then there's Insane, arguably one of the most unsettling tracks in the history of rap. Here, Eminem pushes the boundaries of horrorcore to its extreme, rapping from the perspective of his childhood self in vivid detail describing childhood sexual abuse at the hands of his stepfather.
My stepfather said that I sucked in the bed, so one night he snuck in and said, we're going out back, I want my dick sucked in the shed.
The song's graphic and taboo subject matter does not pull any punches lyrically, but it serves a purpose within the album's overarching theme. It's a stark reminder of how trauma and mental illness can warp the mind, creating a chillingly vivid portrait of dysfunction and depravity. For better or worse, Insane is one of Relapse's boldest artistic statements, refusing to shy away from the uncomfortable or the grotesque. It's a song I genuinely couldn't stomach finishing the first 4 or 5 times I listened to the album, with the lyrical mindfuck starting as soon as the song does. But Relapse isn't just about horror. It's also about recovery. Songs like Deja Vu and Beautiful, in my opinion probably the 2 best songs in all of M's discography, pull back the curtain, showing Eminem as a man grappling with addiction, self-loathing, and the weight of his own fame. The juxtaposition of these deeply personal tracks with the horrorcore aesthetic creates a sense of duality that runs throughout the album, almost like the whiplash of constantly coming in and out of drug-induced self-destructive highs into a more sober and retrospective state of mind.
Sometimes I feel so alone, I just don't know, feels like I've been down this road before.
It's a record about the fight between the monster and the man, the addiction and the artist, the persona and the person. So why doesn't Relapse get the respect it deserves? Part of the answer lies in the public's reaction to its tone and style. By 2009, the horrorcore aesthetic wasn't in vogue, and many listeners found the album's content too dark, too disturbing, or simply too over the top. Critics and fans also took issue with Eminem's exaggerated accents on tracks like Bagpipes from Baghdad and My Mom.
But this is just the story of when I was just a shorty and how I became hooked on that. How can I describe the way I feel? Fucking great, man. Great, man. Make my vocals sound sexy.
Which were seen as distracting or outright annoying. Even Eminem himself hasn't done the album any favors. In later interviews, he's been highly critical of Relapse, calling it a misguided attempt to find his footing after his hiatus.
I have made albums that definitely probably would not be the top of my list. Encore.
Okay.
Relapse, which I believe Encore is a better album than Relapse. Relapse is something that I looked at in a couple of years, went back to and cringed at. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, I didn't even realize I was doing that many accents.
When an artist distances themselves from their own work, it's easy for fans to follow suit. But here's the thing. A lot of the criticism aimed at Relapse misses the point. Yes, the accents are silly, and yes, the album is intentionally grotesque, but that's the whole idea. Relapse isn't supposed to be a straightforward rap album. It's a concept album, a dark, twisted exploration of addiction, violence, and insanity. The exaggerated accents and the over-the-top imagery are part of the twisted theatrics in the mind of a twisted killer, a way of immersing the listener in this macabre world. And while it's true that Relapse doesn't have the same raw, autobiographical feel as the Marshall Mathers LP, that doesn't make it any less personal. In fact, the album's horrorcore framework allows Eminem to confront his demons in a way that feels uniquely raw and cathartic. The horror isn't just a gimmick, it's a metaphor for his own internal struggles. In the years since its release, Relapse has started to find its audience. Many fans now look back on the album as an underrated gem, a bold and uncompromising statement from an artist willing to take risks. Tracks like 3 AM and Beautiful have aged particularly well, and the album's production, courtesy of Dr. Dre, is some of the most polished and atmospheric of Eminem's career. More importantly, Relapse presents a critical turning point for Eminem. It's the album where he began to confront his addiction head-on, setting the stage for his triumphant return on recovery. Without Relapse, there is no recovery. It's the bridge between 2 eras of Eminem's career, and it deserves to be recognized as such. Relapse is far from a perfect album. but its imperfections are part of what makes it so compelling. It's messy, ambitious, and unapologetically weird. A dark, twisted journey into the mind of one of hip-hop's greatest artists. One track that encapsulates this perfectly is the deluxe track Careful What You Wish For. Originally conceived as the opening track of Eminem's scrap retirement album King Mathers, this song ties in the themes of the project together beautifully. It's a reflective and brooding piece that looks back on the consequences of fame, addiction, and public scrutiny. Starting with an intro of multiple news outlets reporting on Eminem's addiction, the 2005 near-fatal shooting of Shady Records artist Obi Trice, and the death of Proof. The haunting production and Eminem's measured delivery creates an atmosphere of finality.
8 years later, I'm still at it. Divorced, remarried, a felon, a father, sleeping pill addict. And this is real talk. I feel like the Incredible Hulk. My back has been broke and I can still walk.
Almost as if he's acknowledging the horrors explored throughout the album while hinting at the hope of recovery. It's a fitting conclusion to Relapse and a reminder of how the album's darkness was never without a purpose. If you've written Relapse off as a misstep or a curiosity, I encourage you to give it another listen. Approach it not as a traditional rap album, but as a concept album. A horror movie brought to life through music. You might just find it as one of Eminem's most fascinating and underrated works. So, what do you think? Is Relapse a misunderstood masterpiece, or is it better left in the shadows of Eminem's discography? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.